The beggar revealed the truth about the twins, and the couple broke down in tears. David Mitchell was squeezing his wife Jessica's hand so tightly her fingers were turning purple. The two were kneeling before the grey granite headstone, where a photo of the twins, Matthew and Benjamin, smiled at them as if they were still there. 6 months had passed since that terrible day, but the pain remained as intense as the first moment. It was then that a shadow slowly approached. A homeless woman in worn-out clothes and a grey hooded coat pulled over her face stopped a few meters away. Jessica raised her red, tear-filled eyes and saw the beggar pointing a trembling finger at the photo of the boys on the headstone. "I know about your sons," whispered the woman, her hoarse voice coming out like a low moan. "I know the truth about what happened that day." David stood up quickly, his face contorted with anger and pain. "How dare you!" he shouted, fists clenched. "How dare you disturb us at a time like this? Leave before I call someone." But Jessica held her husband's arm. Something in the beggar's desperate look made her hesitate. The woman didn't seem to be joking or trying to extort them. There was a real urgency in her expression, an almost sick need to speak. "Please," the beggar begged, taking a step closer. "I was there. I saw everything. Your boys. They aren't where you think they are." The world seemed to stop around the couple. Jessica felt her legs buckle and had to lean on the headstone to keep from falling. David turned pale as paper, his mouth open but unable to form words. "What do you mean by that?" Jessica managed to whisper, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would explode. "They disappeared in the river. The van fell off the bridge. The firefighters searched for days and—" "No," the beggar shook her head violently. "It wasn't like that. I was collecting cans on the bank I saw when the van fell, yes, but I also saw other things. Things no one else saw." David took a threatening step toward the woman. "You're crazy. You're making up cruel stories to torture us. My wife has already suffered too much. I won't let you." "They're alive." The two words came from the beggar's mouth like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. David stood paralyzed, looking at the woman as if she were an apparition. "That's impossible," he murmured. "Impossible. The van sank. The children, they couldn't get out in time. The other bodies were found days later, but Matthew and Benjamin were carried away by the current," the beggar completed. "But away from the accident site, far away. I saw them being dragged downstream, still breathing, still moving. I tried to shout for someone, but who would believe a person like me?" Jessica raised her tear-streaked face, grabbing the beggar's coat. "If this is true, where are they? Why hasn't anyone found them? Why didn't you tell the authorities?" The woman looked around nervously before answering. "Because I followed the river. I walked for miles trying to find them, and I did. But when I got to the place, they weren't alone anymore." "What do you mean?" David knelt beside his wife, finally allowing a spark of hope to ignite in his chest. "A man had taken them, an old man who lives in a house far from town. I saw from a distance. The boys were injured but alive. He took them inside the house." Jessica's heart raced. Her hands trembled so much she could barely stand. "And why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I tried," the beggar defended herself, tears beginning to stream down her dirty face. "I went to the police station the next day, but when I told the story, they laughed at me. They said I was making it up, that it was the effect of alcohol or drugs. They threw me out. I tried again a few times, but nobody believes someone like me." David stood up, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "Even if this is true, if this isn't just a delusion or a cruel attempt to give us false hope, why are you telling us now? 6 months have passed." "Because I can't live with this weight anymore," the beggar woman sobbed. "Every night I see your faces on television, begging for information. Every night I dream about those boys. I tried going back to the house a few times, but it's too far for me to walk, and when I manage to get close, the man chases me away." Jessica approached the woman, holding her rough, dirty hands. "Where is this house? Can you take us there?" "I can try," the beggar replied hesitantly. "But you need to understand. I could be wrong. They might not be your children. The distance, the time that's passed. Maybe I saw wrong. But are you sure they were 2 children the age of our kids?" David asked, his voice heavy with contained emotion. Yes, twins. Light brown hair, about the height your children were in the newspaper photo. One of them was wearing a torn blue t-shirt. Jessica gasped. Matthew was wearing a blue soccer team t-shirt on the day of the school trip. My God, she whispered. My God, it could be true. David took his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. Let's go now. Immediately. You're going to show us where this house is. Not now, the beggar shook her head. It's getting dark and the path is dangerous. Besides, if the man sees you coming with the police or making a lot of noise, he might do something to the boys. What kind of thing? Jessica asked, panic taking hold of her again. I don't know, but he seemed very nervous when he saw me peeking. He said things about the children being orphans now, that he was taking care of them because no one else would. He seemed kind of confused. The couple exchanged a look filled with both fear and hope. Tomorrow morning, David decided. You will take us there, but if this is some kind of scam or cruel joke, I swear that— It's not, the beggar interrupted. I just want to do the right thing. I should have done it months ago, but I was scared. Now it doesn't matter what happens to me anymore. Those children need to come home. Jessica took a $50 bill from her purse and handed it to the woman. What's your name? Grace, the beggar replied softly. Grace Thompson. Grace, can you stay at a hotel tonight? Have something hot to eat. Early tomorrow at 7 in the morning we meet at the city's main square, and then you take us to that house. Grace took the money with reverence, as if it were a priceless treasure. Thank you. Thank you for believing me. After the beggar walked away, David and Jessica stood in silence for long minutes in front of the headstone. The cold afternoon wind rustled the flowers they had brought. Do you think it could be true? Jessica finally asked, her voice almost inaudible. I don't know, David admitted. Part of me wants to believe it so much it hurts, but the rational part is screaming that it's impossible. If our children were alive, if someone had found them— What if she's right? Jessica interrupted him. What if Matthew and Benjamin have been alive all this time and we've been here crying over an empty grave while they're somewhere needing us? David swallowed hard. The possibility was both wonderful and too terrifying to be true. Tomorrow we'll find out, he said, hugging his wife tightly. One way or another, tomorrow we'll know the truth. That night, neither David nor Jessica could sleep. They lay in bed, holding hands in the dark, each lost in their own thoughts and fears. What if it was true? What if it wasn't? How would they bear another disappointment after so much suffering? By 6 in the morning, they were already dressed and ready to go. David had put photos of the twins in his wallet, along with the boys' documents and birth certificates. Jessica packed some of the children's favorite toys in a bag, in the desperate hope that she might need them. The main square of Aspen was practically empty when they arrived. Only a few retirees were out for their morning walk, and the occasional shopkeeper opening their store. David looked at his watch every 30 seconds, his nervousness growing with each passing minute. What if she doesn't come? Jessica murmured. What if it was all an illusion, or worse, a cruel lie? She'll come, David said, trying to convince himself as much as his wife. Something in her eyes. She was telling the truth. At 7:15, a familiar figure came staggering from one of the side streets. Grace seemed a little better than the night before. Her clothes were still worn, but she was visibly cleaner, and there were signs she had eaten something hot. Sorry, I'm late, she said, breathless. It took me a while to find you. The square is bigger than I remembered. How long is the drive to this house? And David asked directly. By car, maybe an hour, Grace replied. It's on a dirt road after passing the last farm in the area. The man lives very isolated. During the drive, Grace told more details about what she had seen. She explained that she used to collect recyclable materials along the river, especially after heavy storms, when the current would bring all sorts of things from the towns upstream. On the day of the accident, I was on a part of the river about 6 miles below the bridge, she told them. I heard the noise of the accident in the distance, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Only when I saw the boys floating did I understand what had happened. Were they conscious? Jessica asked, gripping the front seat of the car. Conscious, but very weak. One of them was holding the other, keeping him from sinking. I shouted to them, tried to get closer, but the current took them to a stretch where I couldn't reach. And the man who grabbed them appeared out of nowhere. as if he was waiting for them, went into the water without hesitation and pulled them to the shore. Then he took them to a little house about 100 yards upriver in a small clearing. David felt a shiver down his spine. There was something strange about the story, something that didn't quite fit. Why didn't this man look for the authorities? If he saved 2 clearly lost children, that's what worries me the most, Grace admitted. When I managed to get near the house the next day, I heard him talking to the boys. He seemed to be saying that they were now orphans, that their family had gone away and wasn't coming back, as if he was trying to convince them of it. Jessica felt a wave of nausea. My God, he kidnapped them. I don't know if it's quite like that, Grace pondered. Maybe he really believed they had no family, or maybe he was confused. He seemed very old, and sometimes elderly people get a bit disconnected from reality. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, David murmured darkly. The dirt road was potholed and muddy, forcing David to drive slowly. After 40 minutes winding through hills and abandoned crops, Grace pointed to an almost invisible trail opening into the woods. It's that way, about another 1.25 miles. The car rocked violently over the potholes and loose stones. Jessica held the door handle so tightly that her knuckles were white. Her heart was beating so fast she could barely breathe. And then they saw it. A simple little wooden house with a zinc roof and a small vegetable garden on the side. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating someone was home. A clothesline with laundry swayed in the wind, and among the hanging items, Jessica could make out 2 small T-shirts. "Stop the car here," Grace whispered. "If we get too close, he might get scared." David parked behind a large tree about 50 meters from the house. The 3 got out in silence, each step seeming to echo in the morning quiet. That's when they heard it. Laughter. Children's laughter coming from the backyard of the house. Jessica collapsed to her knees on the ground, her hands covering her mouth to muffle her sobs. David stood paralyzed, tears streaming freely down his face. "It's them," Jessica managed to whisper through tears. "I recognize the laughter. They're my children." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. They slowly approached the house, careful not to make any noise. Through a side window, they could see 2 children sitting at the table in a simple kitchen, eating oatmeal. David had to lean against the wall to keep from fainting. It was Matthew and Benjamin. There was no doubt. They were bigger, thinner, with longer hair, but they were definitely his sons. Matthew had a small scar on his forehead that wasn't there before, and Benjamin seemed more serious, quieter than he used to be, but it was them. An elderly man, with white hair and a hunched back, moved around the kitchen preparing more food. He spoke to the boys in a caring tone, like a grandfather would. He didn't seem threatening or cruel. He seemed genuinely caring toward them. "What do we do now?" Jessica whispered, torn between the euphoria of seeing her children alive and the terror of how to approach the situation. "I'll go to the door," David decided. "I'll try to talk to him. Grace, you stay here with Jessica. If anything goes wrong, run to the car and get help." "No," Jessica grabbed him. "We go together. If they are our children, they need to see us. They need to know we never stopped looking for them." David took a deep breath and gently knocked on the front door. The movement inside the house stopped immediately. Footsteps slowly approached, and after an eternity the door opened a crack. The elderly man watched them suspiciously. He must have been about 70, with deep wrinkles on his face and faded blue eyes that seemed to carry a lot of weariness. "Are you lost?" he asked in a cautious voice. "This road doesn't lead anywhere." "My name is David Mitchell," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is my wife, Jessica. We are looking for our children, 8-year-old twins. They disappeared 6 months ago in a school van accident." The man's expression changed instantly. His face paled and he tried to close the door, but David put his foot in the way. "Please," Jessica pleaded. "We just want to see if it's them. If you found them, if you saved them, we are eternally grateful. We just want our children back." "I don't know what you're talking about," the man lied, but his voice trembled. I don't have any children here. You must be mistaken. At that moment, Matthew appeared behind the man, curious to see who was at the door. When his eyes met Jessica's, the world stopped. "Mommy?" he whispered, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Mommy, is that you?" Jessica broke down in tears, reaching her arms out for her son. Matthew ran to her as if pulled by a magnet, burying his face in his mother's neck and crying profusely. "I knew you would find me," he sobbed. "Mr. Harold said you had left, but I knew it was a lie. I knew you would come get me." Benjamin appeared in the doorway too, but was more hesitant. He looked at David with a mixture of recognition and fear, as if unsure whether to trust his own memories. "Dad?" he asked quietly. "Did you really come to get us?" David knelt on the floor and opened his arms. Benjamin ran to him but stopped halfway, looking at the elderly man as if asking for permission. "You can go, my boy," the old man said with a broken voice. They are your real parents." Benjamin then ran to David, who picked him up and hugged him as if he would never let go. "I thought you had forgotten about us," Benjamin cried. "Mr. Harold said you didn't want us anymore because we were disobedient on the field trip." "Never," Jessica said, stroking her son's hair. "We would never forget you. We searched every day. Every single day, Matthew. We never stopped searching for a single minute." The man who called himself Harold stood in the doorway, tears streaming freely down his wrinkled face. I didn't know," he murmured. "When I found them in the river, they were nearly drowning. They couldn't say where they lived, couldn't remember their full names. They were in shock. I thought they were orphans from some slum upstream that no one would miss." "They had trauma-induced amnesia," David said, trying to stay calm despite the anger boiling in his chest. "Why didn't you take them to a hospital, to the police?" I thought about it," Harold defended himself. "But when I saw their condition, hurt, scared, and then when they started to get better, to call me Grandpa, to smile again, I couldn't. It's been so long since I had a family. So long alone." Jessica looked at the man and saw not a cruel kidnapper, but a lonely, desperate man who had clung to the only people who gave him purpose. "You took good care of them," she said softly. "They look healthy, but they have a family. People who love them and who suffered immensely thinking that they were no longer alive." "I know," Harold admitted. "In the last few months, I started to suspect. They sometimes talked about you in their sleep, described a house, a dog, a school, but I was so afraid of losing them." Matthew turned to Harold, still clinging to Jessica. "Grandpa Harold, can you come live with us? You don't have to be alone." Harold's heart visibly broke. He knelt to the boy's level. "No, my dear, you have a real family. A real home. I was just taking care of you until they arrived." "But we like you," Benjamin protested. "You taught us to fish, to make kites, told us stories." Harold smiled through his tears. "And I will cherish those memories forever. You gave me the best months of my life. But now it's time for you to go back where you belong." Grace, who had been watching from a distance, slowly approached. "Mr. Harold," she said timidly, "do you remember me? I always came to collect cans near your house." Harold looked at her for a moment before recognizing her. "Grace, how could I forget? You were always trying to peek at the boys. I thought it was just curiosity." "I knew they had a family," she explained. "I saw them on television, in the newspapers. I tried to tell the authorities, but no one believed me. I always wanted to talk to you, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "That you would hurt the boys if you found out someone knew where they were." Harold shook his head sadly. "I would never hurt these children. They became everything to me, but I understand your concerns. An old man living alone with 2 children, it must look suspicious indeed." David placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. "You saved my children. If it weren't for you, they would have drowned in that river. I have no words to express my gratitude. So you don't hate me, you won't report me." "On the contrary," Jessica said. "We want you to continue to be part of their lives. If you want to, of course. They've clearly become very attached to you." Matthew and Benjamin ran to Harold and hugged him from both sides. "Please, Grandpa Harold," Matthew begged, "come spend Christmas at our house. Mommy makes the best turkey in the world." Harold laughed through his tears. "Maybe I'll accept that invitation, my little one." The trip back to the city was a mix of joy, tears, and fragmented conversations. Matthew and Benjamin told them about the last 6 months, about how Harold taught them to tend the vegetable garden, about the forest animals they watched, about the stories he told at night before bed. "We knew you'd come back," Matthew said, nestled in Jessica's lap in the back seat. "Even when Mr. Harold said you had gone away, I told Ben it was a lie. Mom and Dad never leave their kids behind." "Never ever," Benjamin agreed, holding David's hand. "But we were a little scared that you were mad because we didn't listen to the teacher on the field trip day." Jessica and David exchanged a look full of emotion. "What happened that day?" David asked gently. "Do you remember the accident?" Matthew and Benjamin grew serious for a moment. "We were playing in the van," Matthew began. "The teacher had told us to stay seated, but Ben saw a pretty bird outside and wanted to show everyone. We went to the window. And then the driver took a turn too fast," Benjamin continued. "The van started rocking from side to side. Everyone was screaming. We remember water coming in everywhere," Matthew said, his voice growing quieter, "and not being able to breathe. After that, I don't remember anything until waking up at Grandpa Harold's house." "You were both very brave," Jessica said, kissing her sons' foreheads. "Very brave and very lucky to have found someone so kind to take care of you." During the weeks that followed, the readjustment was gradual. Matthew and Benjamin had developed some new habits during their time with Harold. They woke up earlier, helped with household chores without complaining, and seemed more independent than before. Harold visited the family twice a week, always bringing vegetables from his garden, or small gifts he made with his own hands. The children ran to greet him as if he were a beloved grandfather. Grace also became part of the extended family. Jessica helped her find a job as a cleaner at a municipal school and get a small apartment through a social program. She visited the family on Sundays, always thanking them for having found the courage to tell the truth. 1 month after the reunion, the family was gathered in the living room watching television when Benjamin asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Mum, why is there a headstone with our picture at the cemetery?" Jessica nearly choked on the coffee she was drinking. "How do you know about that?" "We passed by there with Grandpa Harold last week," Matthew explained. "He said he wanted to show us something important. When we got there and saw our picture, he cried a lot and said he was sorry." David knelt down to his son's level. "That headstone is there because we thought that you were no longer with us. When we couldn't find you after the accident, we thought the worst." "And now?" Benjamin asked. "Can we take the headstone down? It's weird knowing our picture is there." Jessica smiled through her tears. "Of course, my love. Actually, we have a better idea. What if we turned that place into something special, a place where other families who have lost loved ones can find hope?" That's how the headstone for Matthew and Benjamin was replaced by a small memorial garden with a bench and a plaque that read, "In memory of all the families who never gave up believing in love." Harold helped plant the flowers, and Grace contributed by taking care of the maintenance. 6 months after the reunion, the family organized a party they called the Second Birth Celebration. Harold, Grace, and several families from the community who had followed the search for the boys took part in the celebration. "This past year was the hardest and yet the most important of our lives," David said during the toast. "We learned that hope should never die, that kindness exists in the most unexpected places, and that families are made by both blood and love." Matthew and Benjamin, now a little older and visibly more mature, helped serve the cake Jessica had made. "What did you learn this whole year?" a neighbor asked the boys. "That real families never give up on each other," Matthew answered without hesitation. "And that sometimes the most important people in our lives appear when we least expect it," Benjamin added, looking affectionately at Harold and Grace. That night, when the children were already asleep, David and Jessica sat on the porch watching the stars. "Have you ever imagined what our lives would be like if Grace hadn't found the courage to speak?" Jessica murmured. "I'd rather not think about that," David admitted. "What matters is that she spoke, and that Harold, despite all the mistakes he made, saved our children and cared for them with love. Sometimes I think it was all too impossible to be a coincidence," Jessica pondered. "Grace being in the right place at the right time, Harold finding the boys, them surviving the accident. Maybe some things are bigger than our understanding," David agreed. But what matters is that our family is whole again. 2 years later, the Mitchell family's story had become known in the region. Harold had moved to a small house just 2 streets away from the family, where Matthew and Benjamin spent every afternoon after school, helping him with the new vegetable garden he had planted in the backyard. Grace had secured a steady job and her own home through a housing loan. She visited the family every Sunday and had become a sort of adoptive aunt to the boys. The relationship between David and Harold had evolved into a genuine friendship. The 2 men discovered they had a lot in common, including a passion for soccer and for tending plants. Harold became the grandfather the boys never had, and found in the Mitchell family the purpose and love he had lost years ago. Matthew and Benjamin, now 10 years old, had developed into exceptionally empathetic and mature children. The experience of almost losing their family and seeing their parents suffering had taught them to value every moment together. On a Sunday afternoon, the family was gathered in Harold's backyard helping him harvest tomatoes when Matthew made an observation that surprised everyone. "You know, Grandpa Harold, I think we met at the right time." "How so, my grandson?" "If you had found us on a normal day, when we were fine and knew where we lived, we would have left the same day. And then we would never have gotten to know you properly. We would never have become a real family." Harold stopped picking tomatoes and looked at the boy with tears in his eyes. "You might be right, Matthew. Sometimes bad things happen so that good things can happen afterward." "And Aunt Grace too," Benjamin added. "If she hadn't been a can collector, she would never have been at the river that day. And if she hadn't had the difficult life she'd had, maybe she wouldn't have had the courage to help us later." Jessica and David exchanged a look full of pride. Their children had learned lessons about compassion and gratitude that many adults never managed to understand. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, David and Jessica sat on the bed talking about the future. "Sometimes I'm afraid this is all a dream," Jessica confessed, "that I'll wake up and still be crying in front of that headstone." "It's not a dream," David reassured her, holding her hand. "It's our reality. A reality we almost lost but managed to recover." "What do you think would have happened to us if we had never found the boys?" David thought for a long moment before answering. "I think our pain would have separated us eventually. The guilt, the anger, the feeling of emptiness. I don't know if our marriage would have survived." "I think the same thing," Jessica admitted. "But now, after everything we've been through, I feel our love is stronger than ever." "Because we learned that nothing is guaranteed," David agreed. "That we need to value every day, every moment, every silly conversation at breakfast." 3 years after the reunion, Matthew and Benjamin had become leaders in their classes at school. They often told their story to classmates and teachers, always emphasizing the importance of never giving up hope. Harold had become something of a local celebrity. Families going through difficulties often sought him out for advice or simply wanting to hear his story of redemption. He always welcomed everyone warmly, offering coffee and vegetables from his garden. Grace had gone back to school through an adult education program. Her dream was to become a social worker to help other families in difficult situations. The experience of having been crucial in reuniting the Mitchell family had given her a new purpose in life. One Saturday morning, while the whole family was gathered at Harold's house preparing a community lunch, a van from the local television station pulled up on the street. A reporter had learned about the story and wanted to do a special feature. "I'm not sure I want to expose the boys like that," Jessica said, worried. "They've been through enough trauma." "But Mom," Matthew interjected, "what if our story helps other families going through what you went through? What if it gives hope to someone who's almost giving up?" "Matthew is right," Benjamin supported. "We can help other people by telling what happened to us." Harold smiled with pride. "These boys have hearts bigger than their bodies." The interview was moving. The reporter was visibly touched as each family member told their version of the story. Harold spoke about his loneliness and how the children had given meaning to his life. Grace explained why it had taken her so long to find the courage to speak. Matthew and Benjamin showed impressive maturity in describing their feelings during the months of separation. "What is the main lesson you take from this experience?" the reporter asked David and Jessica at the end. "That true love is stronger than any circumstance," Jessica answered, "and that sometimes the most unlikely people become angels in our lives." And that we should never ever stop believing, David added. Even when it seems impossible, even when everyone says it's time to accept reality, true love does not accept defeat. The feature aired a week later and had a national impact. Hundreds of families contacted the station, sharing their own stories of loss and reunion. Some were still searching for missing loved ones and asked for guidance. Harold, Grace, and the Mitchell family decided to create a support group for families going through similar situations. They met once a month at the local church, where they shared experiences, gave emotional support, and organized coordinated searches when necessary. The group grew quickly. Within 6 months, it had over 50 participating families. Harold became a sort of official counselor, always available to talk to desperate parents. Grace used her life experience on the streets to help with searches, knowing places and people the police sometimes couldn't reach. Matthew and Benjamin, now 11 years old, often attended the meetings. Their presence gave concrete hope to other families, proving that happy endings were possible. At one of these meetings, a middle-aged mother named Candy was crying inconsolably. Her teenage daughter had disappeared 3 months prior, and the authorities had already classified the case as a probable runaway. "My Lauren would never run away," she insisted. She had plans for the future, a boyfriend, friends. Something happened to her. Grace approached the woman and held her hands. "Candy, tell me where Lauren was last seen." "Leaving school. She always caught the bus at the central square, but that day she never made it to the stop." "And have you looked in the places where people experiencing homelessness tend to stay?" Grace asked. "Sometimes young people going through problems end up joining groups of unhoused individuals for protection." "The police said they've already looked in all the obvious places, but I know places that aren't obvious," Grace said with determination. "Places where people like me hide when we don't want to be found." The following weekend, Grace organized a search with volunteers from the group. They combed through vacant lots, under bridges, abandoned buildings and squats. On Sunday afternoon, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, they found Lauren. The girl was with a group of young runaways, but she was not well. She had been the victim of a scam that left her with no money or documents, and she was too scared to seek help or return home. Candy's reunion with Lauren was as emotional as the Mitchell family's, and once again, Grace had been instrumental in reuniting a family. "How can I thank you?" Candy asked, hugging Grace tightly. "How can I repay what you've done for me?" "By helping the next family," Grace replied simply. "That's how we keep the chain of good deeds going." 5 years after the original reunion, the support group had helped solve over 20 missing persons cases. Harold had written a book about his experience, with all proceeds going to the group. Grace had finished her social work course and was now officially working to help families in crisis. Matthew and Benjamin, now 13-year-old teenagers, had developed a school project about people experiencing homelessness. They organized food and clothing drives, always reminding their classmates that every person has a story and deserves to be treated with dignity. The Mitchell family had moved to a larger house, with an extra room that was always available for Harold whenever he wanted to spend a few days with them. The backyard had a large vegetable garden that the whole family tended together, following the teachings of the man who had saved their children. On a fall afternoon, 5.5 years after the accident, David was in his office when he received an unexpected call. It was a journalist from New York, interested in making a documentary about the family's story. "Mr. Mitchell, your story has touched millions of people across the entire country," the journalist explained. "We want to document not just the reunion, but also how you all built your lives afterward, how you turned a tragedy into strength to help other people." "I need to talk with my family," David replied, "especially with my children. The decision has to be everyone's." That night, during dinner, David presented the proposal. Matthew and Benjamin, now old enough to understand the implications, were excited by the idea. "Dad, if our documentary helps at least one family not to give up searching, it will be worth it," Matthew said. "And it can show everyone how people like Aunt Grace and Grandpa Harold are important," Benjamin added. "Sometimes people judge without knowing the true story." Jessica had some reservations, mainly about the family's exposure, but ended up agreeing when Harold and Grace showed enthusiasm for the project. "Our story doesn't belong only to us," Harold observed. "It belongs to all the families who one day lost hope. If we can give hope back to those people, we have an obligation to do it." The documentary filming lasted 6 months. The crew followed the family's daily life, the support group meetings, and interviewed dozens of families who had been helped by them. The result was a 90-minute film that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was later shown nationwide. The documentary, titled Stronger Than Distance, won 3 awards and was selected to represent the United States at international festivals. More importantly, it generated a wave of social mobilization. Similar support groups emerged in several cities, following the model created by the Mitchell family. Harold, now 75 years old, had become a sought-after speaker at conferences about family and community. His message was always the same: never underestimate the power of an ordinary person to change lives extraordinarily. Grace, with a degree in social work, had been hired by the municipal government to coordinate a pioneering program for finding missing persons. She trained a team of former homeless people to help with the searches, leveraging the unique knowledge these people had about the city. Matthew and Benjamin, now 15 years old, had decided they wanted to pursue careers that would allow them to continue helping people. Matthew wanted to be a psychologist, to work with families in crisis. Benjamin dreamed of being a journalist, to tell stories of overcoming and give a voice to those who didn't have one. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On a sunny spring afternoon, 6 years after the reunion, the whole family was gathered in the memorial garden they had created in place of the old headstone. It was the support group's anniversary, and dozens of families who had been reunited over the years were taking part in the celebration. A young mother approached Jessica with a small girl in her arms. "Mrs. Jessica, I wanted to thank you," she said with tears in her eyes. "My daughter was found because of your group. She had been left in an orphanage by mistake after an accident, and the bureaucracy was preventing me from bringing her back. Grace helped me resolve all the paperwork." Jessica hugged the woman and her daughter. "This is why we exist," she said, "so that no family goes through what we went through without support and hope." Harold was sitting on the garden bench, surrounded by children asking him to tell stories. At 75, he had found a new youth in his purposeful life. Grace circulated among the groups, always attentive to identifying families who needed extra help. Her life experience gave her a special intuition for recognizing signs of despair that others might not notice. Matthew and Benjamin ran between the adults, organizing games for the younger children and talking with teenagers who had gone through experiences similar to theirs. "Sometimes it's hard to believe how our lives have changed," David commented to Jessica as they watched the celebration. 6 years ago, we were completely destroyed. Today, our pain has turned into strength to help hundreds of other people. And it all started with the courage of one person everyone ignored, Jessica reflected, looking affectionately at Grace. A person society had discarded, but who held the key to our happiness. That night, after all the guests had left, the original family gathered in the living room for an intimate conversation. It was a tradition they had developed. Once a month, they would sit together to share feelings and plans. "Dad, Mom," Matthew began, "Benjamin and I were talking, and we want to make a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" David asked, curious. "We want to use some of the money the documentary earned to create an official foundation," Benjamin explained. "An organization that can help families across the country, not just here in our region." Jessica and David exchanged a surprised and proud look. "Have you thought about how that would work?" Jessica asked. "Yes," Matthew replied excitedly. "We could train volunteers in other cities using the method Aunt Grace developed and create a communication network so families can share information between different states. And Grandpa Harold could travel giving lectures to teach other people how to create support groups," Benjamin added. "He already said he'd be up for it." David smiled. His sons had grown not only physically but emotionally and spiritually. The experience that could have traumatized them forever had instead developed in them an extraordinary compassion. "If this is what you want, "We'll study how to make it a reality," he said. "But remember, once we start something like this, we have a huge responsibility to all the people who will trust us." "We understand," Matthew said seriously. "But we also understand we have a debt to the universe. We got a second chance that many families don't get. It's our duty to give back." 6 months later, the Living Hope Foundation was officially registered. Harold had accepted the position of honorary president, Grace was the operational director, and David and Jessica shared the executive leadership. Matthew and Benjamin, despite their age, were official advisory members. The foundation's first branch was opened in Denver, following exactly the model that had worked so well in Aspen. Within 3 months, the local group had already helped solve 2 missing persons cases. The second branch was established in Miami, after a mother from Bahia traveled to Aspen asking for help to find her son. Grace spent 2 weeks in the state capital training local volunteers and establishing partnerships with existing organizations. Within a year, the Living Hope Foundation had branches in 12 U.S. cities. The method developed by Grace had been systematized and turned into a training manual that was distributed free to anyone interested in starting a support group. Harold, now 76, traveled across the country once a month giving lectures and training. His energy seemed inexhaustible, fueled by the certainty that he was fulfilling his life's purpose. Grace had become a nationally recognized expert in searching for missing persons. Universities invited her to teach, and international organizations wanted to learn her methods. She always emphasized that her knowledge came from life experience, not from books. Matthew and Benjamin, now 16 years old, divided their time between their regular studies and work at the foundation. They had developed a specific project to help homeless teenagers, using their own experience to establish trust with traumatized youth. On a winter afternoon, 2 years after the foundation's creation, David received a call that would once again change the course of their lives. It was a United Nations representative, interested in taking the American model to other countries. "Mr. Mitchell, we have received impressive reports about the work of the Living Hope Foundation," the voice on the other end of the line explained. "We would like to propose a partnership to implement a similar methodology in other countries in Latin America." "This is an honor," David replied, "but I need to consult my team. Our foundation is small, and an international expansion would be a major challenge." "We understand perfectly. We are not talking about a transfer of responsibility, but a transfer of knowledge. We provide logistical and financial support. You provide the expertise and training." That night, during the family dinner, David presented the proposal. The reaction was mixed, excitement and concern at the same time. "It would be amazing to be able to help families in other countries," Matthew said. "But how do we ensure our method works in different cultures? And how do we maintain the quality of the work if we're spread across so many places?" Benjamin asked practically. Harold, who was dining with them as he usually did twice a week, pondered carefully before speaking. "My boys, when I found you at the river, I never imagined that moment would lead to all this. But I've learned that when you have something truly good to offer, it is your duty to share it even if it's scary." "Grandpa is right," Grace agreed, "but we need to be careful not to lose our essence. What makes our work special is that it comes from the heart, from real experience, not from manuals or theories." Jessica had been quiet throughout the discussion, absorbing everyone's viewpoints. "I think we should accept," she said finally, "but with clear conditions. We will train trainers in each country, people who will deeply understand our philosophy and methodology before starting to work with families. And we need to maintain regular visits to ensure standards are being upheld," David added. "Our responsibility doesn't end when we teach the method. It continues as long as our name is associated with the work." The decision was made. The Living Hope Foundation would accept the international partnership, but in a gradual and careful manner. The first country chosen was Canada, for its cultural and geographical proximity. Grace and Harold traveled to Portland and spent a month training an initial group of Canadian volunteers. The success was immediate. In just 3 weeks, the local group had solved its first case, reuniting a family that had been separated for 2 years. The model was then expanded to Canada and Oregon. In each country, The Living Hope Foundation established a partnership with already established local organizations, respecting the cultural particularities of each place, but maintaining the fundamental principles of hope, persistence, and compassion. Matthew and Benjamin, now 17 years old, had become young ambassadors for the foundation. They traveled frequently to other branches, specializing in working with families who had lost teenagers. Their own experience of separation and reunion gave them unique credibility for this type of work. On one of these trips to the branch in Chicago, they met a family who would profoundly mark their lives. Charles and Helen Morrison had lost their 16-year-old son, Matthew, 4 months earlier. The boy had gone out to meet friends and never returned home. "The police say he probably joined some gang," Helen cried during the first meeting. "But my son wasn't like that. He was studious, responsible. Something happened to him." Matthew and Benjamin spent a week working intensively with the Morrison family. They organized searches in places where Canadian street youth often took refuge, used social media to spread information about the disappearance, and spoke with other teenagers who might have information. On the 6th day, they received an anonymous call. A young voice said they had information about Matthew and arranged a meeting in a public square. When they arrived, they found a street girl of about 15. "Are you the Americans looking for Matthew?" she asked nervously. "We are," Benjamin replied gently. "Do you know him?" "He's in a place that isn't safe," the girl said, constantly looking over her shoulder. "He was tricked by people who promised work, but now he's trapped. He can't leave." Matthew felt his blood run cold. "What kind of work? Where is he?" "In a clandestine factory. They make the boys work almost non-stop, pay very little, and don't let them leave. There are guards at the door." Benjamin exchanged an alarmed look with his brother. They were facing a much more serious case than they had imagined. "Can you take us there?" Matthew asked. "No," the girl shook her head vigorously. "It's too dangerous. But I can draw a map." She took a piece of paper from a nearby trash can and drew a rudimentary map showing how to get to an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago. "You can't go alone," she warned. "You need the police. But when the police go, it has to be fast, because if the bosses suspect anything, they'll move all the boys somewhere else." Matthew and Benjamin immediately took the information to Charles and Helen, who contacted the Canadian police. The operation was carefully planned for the next day. When the police raided the warehouse, they found 15 teenagers working in precarious conditions in an illegal clothing factory. Matthew was among them, thin and frightened, but alive and without serious injuries. The Morrison family reunion was emotional, but it also revealed a frightening reality. There were dozens of similar operations exploiting vulnerable youth. Matthew recounted that he had been approached on the street by men who offered well-paid work, and when he realized it was a trap, it was already too late to escape. Matthew and Benjamin returned to the United States deeply impacted by the experience. They had discovered that the problem of missing persons was closely linked to issues of exploitation and human trafficking. "Mom, Dad," Matthew said on the first night back home, "we need to expand our work. It's not just a matter of reuniting families, it's a matter of broader social protection." "What do you have in mind?" David asked. "Partnerships with organizations that combat human trafficking," Benjamin explained. "Specific training for our volunteers to identify signs of exploitation, and preventive programs for youth in vulnerable situations." Harold, who had followed the entire conversation in silence, finally spoke. "My grandsons, you are growing up and discovering that the world is more complicated than we imagined. But that should not discourage us. It should give us more determination to make a difference," Grace agreed. "In my time on the streets, I saw many situations I didn't understand back then. Girls who disappeared suddenly, boys who were taken away with promises of work. Now I understand many were victims of exploitation. Starting from that conversation, the Living Hope Foundation began to specialize in prevention as well. They developed educational programs for schools, teaching teenagers to identify risky situations and how to ask for help. Harold created a series of specific lectures for parents, teaching them to recognize signs that their children might be being groomed by exploiters. Grace Thompson developed training to identify and approach children and adolescents on the streets who might be being exploited. Matthew and Benjamin specialized in working directly with young victims of exploitation who had been rescued. Their personal experience of trauma and recovery made them especially effective in this work. 2 years after Mateo's case, the Living Hope Foundation had helped rescue over 50 young people in situations of exploitation in 3 countries. They worked in partnership with international organizations specialized in combating human trafficking, always maintaining focus on the human and emotional aspect of family reunification. At an international human rights conference in Geneva, Harold was invited to give a lecture about the Foundation's work. At 78 years old, he took the stage before delegates from 50 countries to tell his story. 8 years ago, I was a lonely man who made a terrible mistake by keeping 2 children away from their family, he began. Today, I am part of an extended family that dedicates its life to ensuring other families do not go through the pain of separation. The audience was in absolute silence as Harold told the whole story, from the moment he found Matthew and Benjamin at the river to the Foundation's current international work. The lesson I learned is that it's never too late to do what is right, he concluded, and that sometimes our greatest failures become our greatest opportunities to do good. The lecture had worldwide repercussions. Dozens of countries expressed interest in implementing the Living Hope Foundation model. Harold, Grace Thompson, and the Mitchell family became specialized consultants in family reunification and human trafficking prevention. Matthew and Benjamin, now 19 years old and about to enter university, had decided to study psychology and international law, respectively. They wanted to have the necessary academic tools to further expand the Foundation's work. "You don't have to dedicate your entire lives to this," Jessica said in a conversation about her children's future. "You have the right to follow your own dreams." "But Mom," Matthew replied, "this is our dream. It's not an obligation, it's a passion. Everything we've lived through brought us here." "And we have a unique perspective," Benjamin added. "We were the lost children who were found. Now we want to be the adults who help find other lost children." David Mitchell felt a wave of pride and emotion. His children had grown up to become exactly the type of people he had always dreamed they would be: compassionate, determined, and dedicated to making a difference in the world. That night, the whole family gathered in the backyard for a celebratory barbecue. It was the 8th anniversary of the reunion, a date they always celebrated with gratitude and reflection. Harold, now a bit slower but still full of energy, tended to the grill with help from Matthew and Benjamin. Grace Thompson set the table with Jessica, telling funny stories about the latest rescues she had coordinated. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that van hadn't gone off the bridge," Jessica commented while arranging the centerpiece flowers. "We would never have met," Grace answered. "Harold would still be alone. I'd still be picking through trash without purpose, and you would just be a normal family." "Do normal families even exist?" Jessica laughed. "I think every family has its own adventures and challenges." "Yes, but our adventure has helped hundreds of other families," Grace observed. "It's as if our pain turned into medicine for other people." Across the yard, David watched Harold teaching the boys how to flip the meat on the grill. The man he had considered a kidnapper 8 years ago was now one of the most beloved members of his family. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing his father's thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about how mysterious life is," David replied. "How events that seemed terrible at the time can lead to wonderful things we never could have imagined." "Do you regret anything that happened?" Benjamin asked. David thought carefully before answering. "I regret the pain we felt during those 6 months. I regret almost giving up hope several times, but I don't regret anything that happened after we found you again. Every day since then has been a gift." Harold stopped tending to the meat and turned to the family. "You know what makes me happiest in this whole story?" "What, Grandpa?" the twins asked at the same time. "It's that we turned a story of near tragedy into a story of hope that's spreading all over the world. Other families are being reunited because we had the courage to turn our pain into action." Grace raised her glass of juice. "A toast," she said, her voice emotional. A toast to happy endings that become new beginnings. Everyone raised their glasses and drank together under the starry sky of Aspen, a family that had been formed not just by blood, but by love, by adversity overcome, and by the shared purpose of spreading hope throughout the world. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 10 years had passed since that first meeting at the cemetery. Matthew and Benjamin, now young adults of 23, had graduated and returned to work full-time at the Living Hope Foundation. Matthew as a psychologist specializing in family reunification, and Benjamin as a lawyer focused on human rights and combating human trafficking. Harold, at 81, was still active, but had passed most of the administrative responsibilities to the younger generations. He continued to give talks, but now focused more on being a wise counselor and a welcoming presence for the desperate families arriving at the foundation. Grace, at 55, had become one of the country's leading experts in locating missing persons. She led a team of 20 former homeless people who worked as specialized investigators, knowing every corner of the cities where the foundation operated. The Living Hope Foundation now had branches in 15 countries and had helped reunite over 1,200 families. But for the Mitchell family, every reunion was still as thrilling as the first. On a Monday morning, Grace received a call that made her particularly excited. It was from a woman named Grace from Phoenix, who had lost contact with her twin sister 20 years earlier. The two were separated when they were teenagers, Grace explained via television, as they now had a weekly TV program to publicize cases in search of solutions. I was adopted by a family from Arizona. She stayed in an orphanage in New York. I lost contact when I turned 18 and left my adoptive parents' home. I've searched everywhere, but never found any clue. Matthew and Benjamin exchanged a significant look. Cases of separated siblings always touched them in a special way, reminding them of how terrible it would be to be apart from each other. Grace, do you have any photos from when you were children? Any documents? Grace asked. I have one photo of us when we were 12, and I remember the name of the orphanage where she stayed, but when I looked there, they told me the records from that period were lost in a fire. Email the photo to us, Matthew said. We'll use our network to spread the image, and Benjamin, our lawyer, will investigate if there are records elsewhere that might help. Grace's case became a priority for the team. Benjamin discovered that although the orphanage records had been lost, there were copies in civil registry offices that still existed. With the help of a volunteer lawyer in New York, they managed to trace the full name of the missing sister, Hope. What an incredible coincidence, Jessica commented when she learned the name. Hope, like our foundation. Perhaps it's not a coincidence, Harold said with a mysterious smile. Perhaps it's a sign that we're on the right path. The search for Hope was intensive. Grace's team combed through public records, employment databases, voter lists, and even social media profiles. After 3 weeks of investigation, they found a promising lead. A woman named Hope Mitchell, 42 years old, worked as a nurse at a public hospital in Philadelphia. The age matched, and the photo on the identity document showed facial features very similar to Grace's. Matthew called the hospital and managed to speak directly with Hope. Hope, my name is Matthew Mitchell from the Living Hope Foundation. We're investigating a case of a family that was separated 20 years ago, and we believe you may be the person we're looking for. What do you mean? The voice on the other end of the line sounded confused. What kind of family? Did you have a twin sister? Were you separated when you were teenagers? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Matthew heard a muffled sob. Grace? Hope whispered. Did you find my Grace? We found her, Matthew confirmed, his voice choked with emotion. She has been looking for you for 20 years. The sisters' reunion was arranged for the following weekend at the Foundation's headquarters in Aspen. Grace traveled from Phoenix and Hope came from Philadelphia. The two arrived at the same time, but through different gates, so the moment of meeting would be even more special. Harold, Grace, Matthew, Benjamin, David, and Jessica were all present to witness the reunion. When the two women saw each other for the first time in 20 years, The silence was absolute for a few seconds. "Grace?" Hope whispered, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Hope!" Grace shouted, running to hug her sister. The two broke down in tears, embracing as if trying to make up for 2 decades of separation in a single moment. Everyone present cried along, including Harold, who was always particularly moved by sibling reunions. "I never stopped looking for you," Grace sobbed. "Not a single day passed without me thinking of you." "Me too," Hope replied. "I became a nurse because I always dreamed of taking care of you if you were sick somewhere. Every patient I treated, I imagined it could be you." The reunion of the twin sisters became one of the Foundation's most famous cases. The story was on the cover of several national magazines and inspired a television movie. Even more importantly, it generated a new wave of searches for separated siblings, resulting in the reunion of over 50 families in the following months. Grace and Hope decided to move to the same city. They chose Aspen to be near the foundation that had changed their lives. They bought houses on the same street and began to make up for lost time. "You know what impresses me most about these two?" Grace commented in a team meeting a few weeks later. "It's how they've adapted to each other. 20 years apart, completely different lives, but the connection between them remained intact." "It's the power of true sibling love," Matthew observed, looking affectionately at Benjamin. "I can't imagine my life without Ben, even if we were separated for decades." "Neither can I," Benjamin agreed. "It's a connection that goes beyond time and distance." Harold smiled at the two young men. "You two are a living example that sibling love can overcome any adversity. And now you're dedicating your lives to helping other siblings reunite." That same year, the Living Hope Foundation launched a special project called Siblings Forever, focused specifically on reuniting siblings who had been separated in childhood by adoption, family problems, or tragedies. The project was extraordinarily successful. In just 2 years, over 300 siblings were reunited through the program. Grace and Hope became volunteer ambassadors for the project, traveling across the country telling their story and encouraging others to never give up the search. During one of these talks in Seattle, an elderly woman approached Grace after the presentation. "My dear, your story gave me the courage to share something I've kept hidden for 50 years, the lady said with a trembling voice. "I had twins when I was very young. My family forced me to give one up for adoption and keep only the other. I never knew what happened to the boy I gave away." Grace held the woman's hands. "What's your name?" "Evelyn. And my son who stayed with me is named John. The one who was given away was named Joseph." "Evelyn, how old are you?" 72. And the boys would be 51 now. Grace immediately called Matthew at the Foundation's headquarters. "Matthew, we have an urgent case here, a separation from 50 years ago." Matthew and Benjamin took the first flight to Seattle. When they arrived, they spoke at length with Evelyn and with John, who had accompanied his mother to the talk without knowing what it was about. "Mom," John said, visibly shocked. "How did you keep this secret for 50 years?" "The guilt consumed me, son," Evelyn cried. "But back then, a single mother had no choice. My parents said either I gave up one of the babies or they would throw me out of the house with both. And you never tried to look for my brother?" "I tried several times when you were little, but the orphanage said he had been adopted by a family from another state and that they couldn't give me any information." Benjamin began the investigation immediately. 50 years was a long time, but the adoption records from that era were more detailed than current ones. In 3 days, he had found Joseph's adoption record. The boy had been adopted by a family from California, and his name was changed to Joseph Charles Thompson. With the help of the Foundation's branch in Santa Barbara, they managed to locate Joseph Charles, who was now a 51-year-old retired engineer. When Matthew called Joseph Charles, the initial conversation was difficult. "What do you mean I have a twin brother?" Joseph Charles asked, incredulous. "My adoptive parents always told me I was an only child and that my biological mother died in childbirth." "It's a complicated situation," Matthew explained patiently. "Your biological mother is alive and has been looking for you for 50 years, and you have a twin brother who also didn't know of your existence until 3 days ago." Joseph Charles asked for some time to process the information. He was married, had 3 adult children, and a completely established life. The revelation that he had a living biological family left him deeply shaken. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he confessed in a second conversation with Matthew. "It's a lot of information, a lot of emotion." "We understand perfectly," Matthew said with empathy. "There's no rush. You have all the time you need to decide if you want to meet them." "And if I decide I don't want to? Will you insist?" "Never," Matthew assured. "Our mission is to reunite families who want to be together. If you prefer to keep your life as it is, we will completely respect your decision." Joseph Charles took 2 weeks to decide. During that time, John and Evelyn waited anxiously, but respected the space he needed. Finally, Joseph Charles called back. "I want to meet them," he said. "I'm 51 years old and I just found out I have a twin brother. How could I not want to meet him?" The reunion was scheduled for the following month, again at the Foundation's headquarters. Evelyn, now 72, was visibly nervous in the week leading up to the meeting. "What if he hates me for giving him up?" she asked Mary during a visit. "What if he thinks I should have fought harder to keep both of them?" "Evelyn," Mary said gently, "you were a scared girl in a time when single mothers had no support. You did what you could do in that moment. Joseph Charles is a mature man. He will understand." John was equally nervous, but for different reasons. "What if we have nothing in common?" he asked Matthew. "What if 50 years of separate lives have made us completely different people?" "You are twin brothers," Matthew reminded. "There is a connection that goes beyond life experiences. Ben and I are proof of that." On the day of the reunion, Joseph Charles arrived accompanied by his wife and one of his sons. He had asked for his family's support to face that very important moment. When Evelyn saw Joseph Charles for the first time in 51 years, she broke down in tears. "My son," she whispered, extending trembling arms, "my little boy that I gave up." Joseph Charles approached slowly, visibly emotional but still cautious. "Mother," he said softly, trying out the word. "It's strange to call you mother after so long." "You don't have to call me mother if you don't feel comfortable," Evelyn said quickly. "I know you already have a mother who raised you and loved you. I just wanted you to know that I always thought of you." Joseph Charles hugged her then, and the two cried together for long minutes. Then it was John's turn to approach. The two brothers looked at each other in silence, studying each other's faces. "You have the same eyes as me," John finally said, "the same shape of the mouth. And you have the same scar on your eyebrow that I have," Joseph Charles observed. "Where did you get yours?" "Fell off my bike when I was 7. And you?" "Fell from a tree when I was 8. The two laughed at the same time, and the tension of the moment began to dissolve. "Seems like even apart, we found ways to hurt ourselves the same," Joseph Charles joked. "We were always brothers," John replied. "We just didn't know it." In the weeks following the reunion, John and Joseph Charles developed a slow but solid friendship. They discovered that both were engineers, both liked to fish, and both had the same kind of dry humor. The coincidences were so many that sometimes they seemed to have been planned by fate. Joseph Charles also developed a special relationship with Evelyn. He understood that she had been a victim of circumstances, not a mother who abandoned a child by choice. "I don't blame her," he said to Matthew in a conversation months later. "She was a child trying to survive in a cruel time for single mothers. In fact, I'm grateful she had the courage to give me to a family who could give me a better life." The case of Evelyn, John, and Joseph Charles became an example for other families dealing with old adoptions and family secrets. The foundation began receiving calls from elderly people who had kept similar secrets for decades and now wanted to try to repair the past. Harold, now 82, created a special program to handle these delicate cases. He called the program "It's Never Too Late" and focused on family reunions where much time had passed. "Forgiveness is one of the most powerful healing forces that exists," Harold explained during an interview about the new program. "And it's never too late to ask for forgiveness or to grant forgiveness." Grace developed special techniques for investigating old cases, working with historical archives, old public records offices, and even cemeteries to trace families that had been lost for decades. Matthew and Benjamin specialized in psychological preparation for complex reunions, helping families manage expectations and emotions when many years of separation and different life experiences created unique challenges. 5 years after the launch of the It's Never Too Late program, the Living Hope Foundation had reunited over 200 families with separations of more than 20 years. Some of the reunions were challenging, others were miraculous, but all were important for the people involved. On a fall morning, 15 years after the first meeting at the cemetery, Grace received a call that left her particularly excited. "Grace, this is Dr. Anderson from New York General Hospital," the voice on the other end said. "We have a case we think you could help with." "What kind of case?" "An elderly woman was admitted here 3 days ago. She was found unconscious on the street, apparently a victim of a stroke. When she woke up, she can only repeat 2 names, Anthony and Mary. The doctors think they are her children, but we have no identification." "How old does she appear to be?" "The doctors estimate between 70 and 80 years old. She seems to have lived on the streets for a long time, but there are signs that it wasn't always that way. Her hands show she once did fine manual work, possibly sewing." Grace felt her investigator's intuition activate. "What is her name?" "We don't know. She can't say her own name, only repeats Anthony and Mary constantly." "I'll go to New York this afternoon," Grace decided. "Can you give us permission to visit her?" "Of course. Any help will be welcome." Grace traveled to New York, accompanied by Matthew. When they arrived at the hospital and saw the elderly woman, she was awake, but visibly confused and frightened. "Anthony," she murmured repeatedly. "Mary, my children. Where are my children?" Matthew approached the bed carefully. "Ma'am, my name is Matthew. This is Grace. We've come to help you find Anthony and Mary." The woman looked at them with wide eyes. "Do you know my children? Where are they? Are they okay?" "We will find them," Grace promised. "But first, can you help us with some information? What is your name?" The woman thought with visible effort. I don't remember. But I remember my children. Anthony had a scar on his chin, a small scar. And Mary sang like a little bird." Matthew exchanged a meaningful look with Grace. Even with her memory affected by the stroke, the woman remembered her children vividly. This usually meant the separation had been traumatic. In the following days, Grace began an intensive investigation. She checked missing persons records from the last 20 years, searched for cases of women who had lost contact with their children, and spread the description of the woman through the Foundation's network of contacts. The first lead came from a retired social worker who recognized the description. "I remember a case from about 15 years ago," she said over the phone. "A woman named Rose Harris lost custody of her children after her husband was arrested for domestic violence. She fell into depression, started drinking, and eventually ended up on the streets. The children were placed for adoption." "Do you remember the children's names?" "One was Anthony, yes. The other was... let me think. It was a girl, but it wasn't Mary. It was Mary. Mary, who everyone called Mary." Grace felt a wave of hope. "Do you have any record of this case? I can try to look in the old archives. But you know how it is, after so many years." While the social worker searched the records, Matthew worked with Rose, as they decided to call her temporarily, to recover more memories. "Rose, do you remember where you lived with Anthony and Mary?" "A small house," she said slowly. "There was a mango tree in the backyard. Anthony would climb it to get the fruit, even though I scolded him. And Mary helped with the cooking. She made the best brigadeiro in the world." "Do you remember the name of your street?" Rose closed her eyes, concentrating intensely. Street of Flowers? No, that's not it. Hope Street. It was Hope Street, in the Union District. Matthew immediately called Benjamin. "Ben, I need you to investigate property records on Hope Street, Union District, New York. We're looking for a Harris family from 15 years ago." Benjamin worked all night, and by the next morning had found the record. Rose Marie Harris had lived at 245 Hope Street until 2009, when the house was sold to pay debts after she lost custody of the children. "I found more information," Benjamin reported. Her ex-husband, John Charles Harris, served 5 years in prison for domestic assault. He was released in 2012 but apparently did not try to contact his former children. And the children? Anthony Charles Harris was adopted by a family in Philadelphia when he was 12. His name was changed to Anthony Charles Mitchell. Mary Harris was adopted by a family in San Diego when she was 10. Name changed to Mary Santos. Grace felt her heart race. After 15 years separated from her children, Rose could finally be reunited with them. But first, they needed to find Anthony and Mary as adults and verify if they wanted to see their birth mother. The search for Anthony was relatively easy. They found him working as a mechanic in Philadelphia, married with 2 young children. When Matthew called him, the conversation was tense. "What do you mean, my birth mother?" Anthony asked suspiciously. "My adoptive parents always told me she had died of an overdose." "Anthony, we know this is shocking," Matthew said patiently. "Your mother is alive, but she is sick in a hospital in New York. She suffered a stroke, and the only thing she can repeat are her children's names. She is asking for you and for Mary." "Mary? My sister? Where is she? We are still looking. Would you like to see your mother?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I need to talk to my wife. This is a lot. It's too much all at once." "Of course. You have all the time you need." Finding Mary was more challenging. The record showed she had married at 20 and changed her name again. After 3 days of investigation, Grace found her working as a preschool teacher in Malibu. Jessica's reaction was different from Anthony's. "My mother is alive," she asked, her voice full of emotion. "I always knew she was alive. I always felt she was out there somewhere." "Do you remember her?" "Yes, I do. I remember the smell of the cheap perfume she wore. I remember her teaching me how to make brigadeiro. And I remember the day the social workers took us from home. She was crying so much, trying to hold on to us." "Jessica, your mother is sick. She had a stroke and has memory problems, but she remembers you both perfectly." "I want to see her," Jessica said without hesitation. "I want to see my mother immediately." Jessica arrived at the hospital the next day. When she entered the room, Rose was sleeping. Jessica approached the bed and held her mother's hand. "Mom," she whispered, "it's Mary, your daughter Mary." Rose opened her eyes slowly and focused on Jessica's face. For a moment she seemed confused, then her eyes filled with recognition and tears. "Mary," she exclaimed, trying to sit up in bed. "My little Mary, you've grown so much, you're so beautiful." Jessica broke down in tears, hugging the mother she hadn't seen for 15 years. "I knew you hadn't died, Mom. I knew you were alive somewhere." "Forgive me, daughter," Rose cried. "Forgive me for losing you. I was so sick, so confused. After your father was arrested, I didn't know how to take care of you anymore. It's okay, Mom. None of that was your fault." The reunion of mother and daughter was observed from afar by Matthew and Grace, both visibly moved. 15 years, Grace murmured. 15 years she was on the streets, probably thinking of her children every day. "And now?" Matthew asked. "Anthony still hasn't decided if he wants to come." As if he had heard the conversation, Matthew's phone rang. It was Anthony. "Matthew, I've decided. I want to see my mother. I'm on my way to New York." Anthony arrived 3 hours later, accompanied by his wife. He was visibly nervous when he entered the room and saw Rose talking softly with Jessica. "Mom?" he said hesitantly from the doorway. Rose turned her head, and when she saw Anthony, her face lit up completely. "Anthony, my son!" she cried, reaching out her arms to him. "You still have the scar on your chin, my brave boy who climbed the mango tree." Anthony approached slowly, studying his mother's face. "You look older," he said simply. "And you look stronger," she replied. "You've become a handsome man, my son." They hugged then, and for the first time in 15 years, Rose had both her children in her arms again. "Now we are complete," she whispered. "My family is complete again." Rose's recovery was slow but steady. Motivated by being close to her children again, she tried her hardest in physical therapy and memory exercises. Jessica visited every day, and Anthony came on weekends with his family. 2 months later, Rose was discharged from the hospital. Since she had nowhere to go, Jessica invited her to live with her in Malibu. "Mom, you can help take care of my children," Jessica said. "They'll love having their grandma nearby." "You have children?" Rose asked, surprised. "I'm a grandmother." "You have 2 little grandchildren waiting to meet you, Luke, who's 5, and Anna, who's 3. Rose began to cry with joy. "Grandchildren. I have grandchildren." Rose's integration into Jessica's family was surprisingly smooth. She proved to be a loving and present grandmother, always willing to help with the children and the household chores. Her memory continued to improve gradually, and she regained much of the clarity she had lost during her years on the streets. Anthony also grew closer to his mother, visiting her regularly and including her in the lives of his own children. The children of both brothers adored their newly discovered grandmother, especially because she knew how to tell fantastic stories and make the best brigadeiro they had ever tasted. 6 months after the reunion, Rose's family threw a welcome home party. Harold, Grace, Matthew, Benjamin, David, and Jessica were invited to celebrate. "You know what amazes me most about this story," Harold remarked during the party, watching Rose play with her grandchildren. "It's how a mother's love remained intact even after years of suffering and mental illness." "A mother's heart never forgets," Grace observed. "No matter how bad the situation, the love for her children is always there, waiting to be rediscovered." Matthew and Benjamin were talking with Anthony and Mary about what it was like growing up in adoptive families. "We were lucky," Mary said. "My adoptive family was very loving, but something was always missing. I always felt there was a part of me that was lost." "Me too," Anthony agreed. "My adoptive parents were wonderful, but there were questions they could never answer. Now finally I can understand where I come from. And most importantly," Mary added, "is that now my children know the true family story. They know they have a grandmother who fought hard to survive and who never stopped loving her children." Rose, overhearing the conversation from a distance, approached with her grandchildren. "You know what I've learned these months," she said, her voice clearer and firmer than it had been in years. "I learned that family isn't defined just by blood, but by the choice to love. Anthony and Mary had families who chose to love them when I couldn't, and now we choose to be a family again." That night, after all the guests had left, Rose sat in Mary's backyard watching the stars. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Mary asked, sitting beside her. "I'm thinking about how many years I lost on the streets, lost and confused," Rose replied. "But I'm also thinking about how miraculous it is to be here now, with you getting to know my grandchildren." "Do you regret anything?" Rose thought carefully before answering. "I regret not being strong enough to keep our family together when you were little, but I don't regret the suffering I went through later, because that suffering led me back to you." "How so?" "If I hadn't collapsed on that street, if I hadn't ended up in that hospital, if Grace and Matthew hadn't found me, we might never have been reunited. Sometimes the road home is long and painful, but in the end, it's worth it." Mary hugged her mother in silence, understanding that some lessons can only be learned through great suffering and overcoming. 2 years after Rose's reunion with her children, she had become an active volunteer for the Living Hope Foundation. Her unique experience as someone who had lived on the streets and lost contact with her family made her especially effective in working with similar cases. Rose has a special ability to identify people on the streets who might have family looking for them, Grace explained in a team meeting. "She recognizes signs that we can't see," Harold agreed. "It's as if she developed a special intuition during all those years of suffering. Now she can use that experience to help others." Rose had helped identify and reunite 8 families in 2 years. She worked especially with elderly women on the streets who seemed to be searching for someone. On a spring morning, 20 years after the first meeting at the cemetery, the entire extended family of the Living Hope Foundation gathered for a special celebration. It was the 20th anniversary of Matthew and Benjamin's reunion, and they had decided to throw a big party. Harold, now 86, was sitting in a wheelchair, but still sharp-minded and with a heart full of joy. Grace, at 60, had become one of the most respected people in the country in the field of locating missing persons. Matthew and Benjamin, now 28, were national directors of the Living Hope Foundation, and had married women who shared their passion for helping families in crisis. Both had small children running around the party garden. David and Jessica, now in their 50s, had become international speakers on family resilience and never failed to get emotional when telling their story. 20 years, David said during the night's toast. 20 years since a brave beggar changed our lives forever by telling us a truth no one wanted to believe. And look what grew from that seed of hope, Jessica added, gesturing to all the people present. Hundreds of families reunited, thousands of lives transformed, and an international network of love and support. Matthew asked to speak. I want to especially thank 3 people, he said, his voice choked with emotion. First, Grandpa Harold, who saved us from the water and taught us that mistakes can be turned into opportunities to do good. Second, Aunt Grace, who had the courage to speak the truth when everyone ignored her. And third, our parents, who never gave up looking for us, even when it seemed impossible. Benjamin took over next. And I want to thank all the families who have trusted us over these years. Every reunion we were able to facilitate was a gift to us too. Every tear of joy we saw taught us more about the power of true love. Grace stood up with difficulty, supported by Rose, who had become her inseparable companion. I just want to say that this work gave me a purpose I never thought I could have, she said with emotion in her voice. For years I felt useless, ignored by society. Now I know that all my life experience was preparation to be able to help other people. Harold, from his wheelchair, slowly raised his hand to ask for attention. My dears, he said in a weak but clear voice, when I found Matthew and Benjamin in that river, I was desperate with loneliness. I thought I was saving 2 children, but in truth it was they who saved me. They gave me a family, a purpose, and the chance to redeem my mistakes. He paused to breathe before continuing. Now at 86, I can say my life had meaning. Not for the years I lived, but for the lives we touched together. And the most beautiful thing is that this work will continue through you, young people, even when we old folks are no longer here. The party continued into the late hours, with stories being told, memories being shared, and plans being made for the future. The children ran among the adults, representing a new generation that would grow up knowing the importance of never giving up hope. The following week, Matthew received a call that took him by surprise. It was a Hollywood producer interested in making a movie based on the Mitchell family story and the Living Hope Foundation. Your story has become known internationally, the producer explained. We want to make a film that inspires families all over the world to never give up searching for their loved ones. Matthew discussed the proposal with the family during Sunday dinner. It would be an incredible opportunity to spread our message to the whole world, Jessica pondered. But it also means more exposure, more pressure. And how do we ensure they tell our story respectfully? David asked. Hollywood has a reputation for over-dramatizing things. Harold, who was having dinner with them as he always did on Sundays, gave his opinion. My dears, our story no longer belongs to us. It belongs to all the families who once lost hope. If a movie can give hope to even one family anywhere in the world, we have an obligation to allow it to be made. Grace agreed. But with conditions. They have to understand that the heart of our story isn't the drama, it's the love that never gives up. The negotiations with the studio lasted for months, but they finally reached an agreement that satisfied the whole family. The film would be based on the true story, with direct consultation from the Living Hope Foundation, and all proceeds would go toward expanding the foundation's work. Filming began 2 years later, with Brazilian and American actors portraying the family members. Harold, Grace, Matthew, Benjamin, David, and Jessica participated as consultants, ensuring each scene reflected the emotional truth of their experiences. The film, titled Never Give Up Hope, premiered simultaneously in the United States and Brazil and became an international success. More importantly, it sparked a global wave of interest in family reunification work. Organizations in over 30 countries contacted the Living Hope Foundation requesting training and guidance to establish similar programs. Harold, Grace, and the Mitchell family became specialized consultants, traveling the world to teach their methodology. On one such trip to South Africa, they met a family that had been separated during apartheid and couldn't be reunited due to a lack of proper documentation. "Our experience in the United States can help here," Grace said after assessing the case. "The techniques we developed for working with lost or incomplete records are applicable anywhere." Matthew and Benjamin spent 3 months in South Africa, training local volunteers and helping to establish the first African branch of the Living Hope Foundation. Within 6 months, over 50 South African families had been reunited. The success in South Africa led to invitations to establish similar programs in other African countries, then in Asia, and finally in Europe. Within 5 years of the film's release, the Living Hope Foundation was operating in 42 countries. Harold, now 91, had become an internationally revered figure. Despite his advanced age, he insisted on participating in at least one international trip per year, always saying that, as long as there is one family searching for lost love, there will be work to do. Grace, at 65, had written a book on investigative techniques for locating missing persons that became a worldwide reference in the field. She often joked that from garbage collector to best-selling author was a transformation that could only happen in a story of true love. Matthew and Benjamin, now in their 30s, had become respected leaders in the international human rights movement. They were often invited to speak at United Nations conferences and other international organizations. David and Jessica had retired from their original jobs to dedicate themselves completely to the foundation. They traveled the world giving talks on family resilience and never tired of telling their story to audiences who were always deeply moved. On a sunny summer afternoon, 25 years after the first meeting at the cemetery, the whole family gathered in the memorial garden they had created in place of the old headstone. It was an annual tradition they kept religiously. The family's children, Matthew and Benjamin's kids, and even Harold's great-grandchildren, ran among the flowers while the adults sat on benches talking about the years that had passed. "Sometimes I try to imagine what our life would have been like if that beggar woman hadn't shown up," Jessica said, watching the children play. "I'd rather not think about that," David replied. "What matters is that she did show up, and that we had the courage to believe her." Matthew was talking with Grace about the Foundation's latest project, a program using artificial intelligence to help locate people who had been missing for a long time. "Technology is wonderful," Grace said, "but it will never replace the human heart, intuition, compassion." "I agree," Matthew answered. "Technology is a tool, but love is the fuel." Harold was sitting in a special chair, surrounded by great-grandchildren who loved to hear his stories. At 95, his memory for distant events was sharper than ever. "Grandpa Harold," one of the children asked, "tell us again how you found Uncle Matthew and Uncle Benjamin in the river." Harold smiled, his eyes still bright despite his advanced age. "It was a very cold morning," he began, "and I was very sad because I had no one to love. Then I saw 2 little boys being carried by the water." Benjamin approached and sat down next to Harold. "Grandpa, have you ever regretted anything in this whole story?" Harold thought carefully before answering. "I regret taking so long to understand that keeping you away from your family was wrong. But I don't regret saving you from the water, nor learning to love you as my grandsons. And I definitely don't regret dedicating the rest of my life to helping other families." "And what are you most proud of?" "Seeing the 2 of you become extraordinary men who dedicate your lives to spreading hope around the world. That is worth more than any award or recognition." That night, after all the visitors had left, the original nuclear family sat in the living room for an intimate conversation. It was another tradition they had kept for years. "Mom, Dad," Matthew said, "Benjamin and I were talking, and we want to know what you think about us writing a book telling our whole story. Not just the reunion, but everything that happened after. It would be a way to preserve the lessons we've learned," Benjamin explained, "and to inspire future generations to never give up on love." David and Jessica exchanged a look full of pride. "If you feel the time is right, you have our blessing," Jessica said. "Our story was always bigger than us. It belongs to anyone who needs hope." "But remember," David added, "the story doesn't end with us. It continues through all the families we've helped and all those we will still help. Matthew smiled. Actually, Dad, the story never ends. It only multiplies, spreads, grows. Every family we reunite begins its own story of love and hope. And every child who grows up knowing they should never give up on those they love carries our message into the future, Benjamin added. That night, before bed, David and Jessica stood on the porch looking at the stars, as they had done every night for years. Did you ever imagine that conversation with a beggar in the cemetery would lead to all this? Jessica asked. Never, David admitted, but maybe that's how the best things happen, without planning, just following your heart. And do you regret anything? Only doubting a few times when everything seemed impossible. I should have trusted more in the power of true love. But it's natural to doubt when you're suffering so much. What matters is that in the end, we always chose to believe. David took his wife's hand. We chose to believe, we chose to forgive, we chose to love, and those choices brought us here. And they will take us much further still, Jessica added, looking at the house where her children slept, knowing that tomorrow they would wake up ready to help another family in need. Because that was the truth they had learned in 25 years of journey. True love has no end. It only multiplies infinitely, touching lives that touch other lives, creating waves of hope that spread throughout the entire world. And somewhere, on that same night, a desperate family was about to receive a call that would change their lives forever. Because the Living Hope Foundation never slept, never stopped, never gave up. Just like true love. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe in the power of true love to overcome any obstacle? Leave your opinion in the comments and share if you've ever been through a similar situation. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that will touch your heart. Thank you so much for your company.